In today's world, it is so incredibly difficult to try to find any sort of peace within ourselves, especially when society just kind of shoves drugs, alcohol, even just like our phones as a distraction down our throats. It can be incredibly challenging to even know how to find peace within ourselves. I know for me, growing up, I spent a lot of time, still now I spend a lot of time on my phone. I've indulged in self-destructive behaviors surrounding sex and porn, especially more so as a child, which makes it even more difficult to try to find any sort of peace within ourselves. It's even harder to get out of our depression, and when we're really in our heads with anxiety, it's hard to find peace within ourselves. And what I mean by that is no longer feeling like we have to distract ourselves all the time. Distract ourselves on our phones, distract ourselves by working too much or through our addictions, or maybe that be self-destructive behaviors or relationships that don't actually serve us, because we feel like we have to distract ourselves so that we don't feel the things that we need to feel. Main thing that I wanted to start out with, guys, is telling our story. And what I mean by this is trying to understand why we are the way that we are, why we're struggling to feel like we can't just feel our emotions, why we can't find any sort of peace within ourselves. Because it's difficult. It's difficult to look back on the past and not face any guilt or shame and not feel bad about ourselves. And sometimes looking back in the past won't even feel like that we're the same person still. I was stuttering a little bit there. Sometimes, guys, I still get in my head about how I'm talking. I had a lot of anxiety before recording this video as well. One thing that my professor shared in one of my classes, it was actually my senior seminar that I took last year as a junior, she described our upbringing as a line. Think of this as a line of self-continuity. And self-continuity is basically the continuation of ourself through our story here. And let's think of this as the start is birth, right? That is when we were just born into this world. We didn't really know what was going on yet, and we were just trying to learn and figure out how we fit in the world. We'll call the middle now. This is how we are now. And then the end being, our future. So right now, looking back at our past, it can be challenging to not feel guilty for doing the things that we did, acting the way that we did. And when we actually look back at our past, we realize that who we are now is a reflection of everything that we've gone through in our past. I know for me, because I'm kind of struggling to get my point across, so I'm just gonna use myself as an example. When I went through the whole thing with my neighbor and him terrorizing my family when I was 10 years old, it was incredibly difficult for me to love myself, and I had a lot of hatred versus myself because as you guys know, I'm half black. My dad's black and my mom's white. So when I was growing up in a very white town, it was very easy for me to, I guess, feel like an outcast, feel like I'm different from everybody else, and that I was liked a lot less, especially after going through what I went through. It just made me feel like I deserved to be treated like I was nothing, and deserved to be discriminated against. And that shows up now in a way of my own self-sabotage. I still give in to my porn addiction. That was my way of freeing myself from the pain that I went through when I was a kid. And now it's a much more self-sabotaging thing, because I understand why I am the way that I am, but at the same time I can't help but feel like I have to feel these feelings of uselessness, to feel like I'm just a victim of racism, that I deserve pain. So I seek it out in some points. I seek it out by giving into my addiction and making myself feel like I'm less than. And also, I've been talking about this with my new therapist a lot lately. It's sort of like this self-love versus self-hatred thing that I'm going through in the now. And a lot of it stems from what I went through when I was 10, because obviously nobody's, like I've said this before, nobody's born hating themselves. Nobody's born with that sort of self-attitude. It is something that we learn. It is something that is taught to us through society, through somebody from our past. For me, it's society, a lot. Seeing a lot of racism on the news and learning about it in school. It's like, how do you not take that in? And then especially what I went through with my neighbor, it made me feel like that's what I deserved. So telling our story is what gives us peace. And I know in the moment it's going to hurt like fucking hell. It's going to hurt so bad. And I still spend a lot of my time crying, healing my inner child. But at the same time, it makes us realize that we aren't guilty. We're not the source of our pain. It is something that we were taught. It was something that was brought to us by society, by a loved one. Well, maybe not even a loved one, somebody that was a part of our upbringing. Or maybe it was a bully, maybe it was a traumatizer. There's a lot of reasons why we feel like we can't find peace within ourselves, and all of it stems from us kind of blocking out these things from our past. So when it comes to learning about our story and trying to find peace within ourselves, it's about first telling our story, and then second, realizing, like I said, that we're not to blame. I feel very guilty when I indulge in my self-destructive behaviors. And one thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is why do I do the things that I do? Why do I feel like I have to feel pain? Why do I feel like that this is like an endless loop and I can't get out of it? Part of it is because I'm not addressing my inner child still. And if you guys aren't aware, the inner child is basically, when reflecting on our childhood, it's centered around what we didn't get as a kid, whether that be love, acceptance, craves for just being alive. Like, I feel like a lot of us feel like we have to prove our worth through society, through work. But we are already enough. And I know it's difficult to try to wrap our heads around that because we've been taught that our whole lives that we aren't enough. Confronting ourselves and our emotions is about retracing our steps to the points in our lives that, although they caused a lot of pain, understanding that we didn't deserve that pain, and understanding how that affects who we are now. So, looking back at this, let's say, for me, a big moment was when I was 10 years old. 10 years old. This is when I was traumatized by my neighbor and why I have PTSD today. So when I reflect on this moment and I think about how difficult it was for me to, or still is for me to break this self-hatred and internalized racism, it's important to understand that this is not who I am. My thoughts are not myself. And that just because I'm having these thoughts, it was brought on to me by him. A big part of depression and relating it back to self-continuity is, let's think of this as our life story again. So this line is everything that we've experienced and everything that we're going to experience. This painful experience in the past kind of breaks our self-continuity. It breaks what we believed to be true, and it breaks somewhat of our selfhood. It kind of changes everything about ourselves, about our thought processes, and how we view ourselves. And when we have that break in our self-continuity, we experience depression because we no longer feel like the same as our past in the present now, and then we can't feel like we can move on to our future because we're so stuck in the past. We don't feel like we're that person anymore. And that could be because of almost guilt for feeling joy, then almost guilt for being carefree, because that's our nature. We're allowed to experience those things, but now that we've experienced pain, now that we're going through what we're going through now, it feels foreign. It feels like we were never meant to even experience that. But after this painful experience, we can heal it. And healing it is part of telling our story. It's part of treating ourselves with compassion, realizing that this painful experience isn't who we are. And just because we had this and we're abused, we're bullied, maybe even compared ourselves too much with other people online, we don't deserve to feel that guilt, to feel that pain. And we realize that we're not the perpetrator of our abuse. Although we did take on that role because we felt like we deserved it because of this experience. Because it was just so hard for us to understand that we felt like the only way for us to control our lives, because of how complicated it is, that the only way for us to control our lives was to put the blame on ourselves, which is why we feel like we have to self-sabotage, why we feel like the only way for us to carry out being ourselves is to continue to perpetuate our pain. But we don't deserve that. So even the destructive behaviors, even the guilt that we feel, even the hatred that we have for ourselves is all learned. It's not something that we were inherently made to feel about ourselves, which is how we move towards accepting and loving ourselves, because we realize that this isn't how we're meant to feel about ourselves. And at our heart, at our true nature, just living shouldn't equal pain automatically. And we don't deserve that pain.